Now I have the great honor of introducing somebody who can address not only the legal elements and underpinnings of a situation, but the moral underpinnings of a situation, because Professor Morton Dershowitz has spent his career making sure that we stay true to the truth, whether it's reflected in law or whether it's reflected in our conscience. That is why he's become known as a top lawyer for civil liberties and human rights. And here to talk to us today is Professor Morton Dershowitz.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman. Thank you. Thank you. What a personal honor it is for me to be addressing you here today, not only because of the distinguished company I'm in on this podium, but because of all of you out there, but for another very personal reason as well. My religious tradition, as well as the Islamic religious tradition, says that he who saves even a single human life, it is as if he or she has saved the entire world. We're here today to save a world, and what an honor that is for all of us. Now that the Libyan regime has collapsed and the Syrian regime is under fire, the most repressive regime in the Middle East, perhaps in the entire world, is Ahmadinejad's Iran. The mullahs who run the terrorist theocracy employ torture, rape, disfigurement, and murder to suppress dissent. They threaten genocide against their enemies and seek to develop genocidal weapons capable of wiping entire nations off the face of the earth. They blow up embassies and community centers with massive casualties, including women and children. They target people, including ambassadors, based on religion, ethnicity, and national affiliation. They finance and facilitate terrorism and attacks against both civilians and soldiers, including so many of our own. They commit war crimes, crimes against humanity, and incitement to genocide. They are international criminals, and like other organized criminal groups, they kill the witnesses to their crimes in order to prevent them from giving testimony against their leaders. Now they are planning the mass killing of the largest concentration of witnesses to their crimes in the world today, those who are living in Camp Ashraf in Iraq. 3,400 unarmed Iranian dissidents, many of them eyewitnesses to the worst abuses of the regime over many years, many of them witnesses to the murder of their own family members. These are people who can give testimony. Were the International Criminal Court to indict Ahmadinejad and others who have committed international crimes, and they should and may well do that, some of the most important I can tell you that that issue is actively under consideration today. Some of the most important witnesses might come from the 3,400 residents of Camp Ashraf. That is one important reason why the potential war criminals who run the Iranian regime are so anxious to see Camp Ashraf shut down and the witnesses exposed, as one human rights lawyer put it, to quote the tender mercies of Iranian executioners. It is the current intention of the Iraqi government to close down Camp Ashraf the day American soldiers leave, which is at the end of the year. You know that the Iraqi government reiterated that in a memorandum to the European Union. The residents now, as we all know, have very, very little time to figure out a way to keep themselves out of the clutches of the Iranian killers who will surely be hunting for them. Already dozens have been killed, hundreds wounded by Iraqi soldiers who are unsympathetic to Iranian dissidents. The United States military has granted these dissidents protected person status under the Fourth Geneva Convention, and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees has declared them asylum seekers who are entitled to international protection. But there will be no one to actually protect if Camp Ashraf is closed down and arrangements are not earlier made to provide safe travel and safe haven to them. There are movements afoot to bring a case against Iranian leaders in the International Criminal Court, as I've mentioned. Efforts are underway to try to persuade several nations that are signatories to the Rome Treaty to file charges, including incitement to genocide and the murder of dissidents. If this were to happen, the witnesses who currently reside in Camp Ashraf would secure the additional status of protected witnesses, and the prestige of the International Criminal Court might weigh heavily in favor of assuring that they were not harmed by Iranian killers assigned to keep them from giving relevant testimony. I intend to communicate directly to the Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court and urge him to grant witness-protected status to the potential witnesses who today are in that camp. It is an international crime to tamper with witnesses or to murder witnesses. That's what the mafia does. It's not what civilized societies do. In any event, these 3,400 enemies of Iranian tyranny deserve protection on humanitarian grounds. The actions of the Iranian government and those in Iraq who are toadying up to the mullahs make it clear that these dissidents are potential targets of Iranian mischief. The United States government, which was responsible for disarming them, has the concomitant responsibility to protect them. We've heard from so many now about the impending visit of the Iraqi leader to the presidency of the United States. That was an interesting Freudian slip. If the President of the United States does not demand a change in the Iraqi government's commitment to close the camp, his silence will be taken as acquiescence. And that is so dangerous, silent acquiescence. One excuse, as we all know, offered by those who would not protect the inmates is that they are members of the MEK, which was once, a decade and a half ago, designated, mistakenly in my view, by our government as a terrorist group. This was the first, quote, legal point listed by the Iraqi government in its recent paper to the European communities. Quote, the organization has already been classified by the international community as a terrorist organization. The paper also refers to relations with neighboring countries, which of course means Iran, which is truly a terrorist nation and so regarded by all reasonable people. Now, there are several legal, moral, and practical reasons why this excuse of the MEK being listed just doesn't work. First of all, even if it were true, and it's not, that the MEK is a terrorist group, that designation would not deny the residents of Camp Ashraf protection under international law. Certainly not all the residents, if any, can currently be deemed terrorists. They are disarmed. They are not engaged in any activities which meet any legal definition of terrorism. None of them are combatants under international law, either lawful or unlawful combatants. Secondly, the designation of MEK as a terrorist group has always been highly questionable and is more so today. Even if an organization has once been deemed a terrorist group, it does not mean that it retains that status forever. The law is clear. The status must be repeatedly revisited, and there is no current evidence that would justify continuing in the status of a terrorist group. Consider and compare Consider and compare the Palestine Liberation Organization, which was certainly a terrorist group for many years, blowing up civilian buses, murdering international athletes, hijacking commercial airlines, murdering students, people at prayer, and diplomats. But it no longer retains that formal status, though its leaders, some of them at least, still encourage terrorists by naming public squares after terrorists, by paying money to the families of terrorists, by allowing incitement to terrorism in governmentally sponsored media, and in many other ways. Yet the PLO and the Palestine Authority no longer bear the stigma of terrorism. It follows a fortiori that MEK should not be considered a terrorist group now, even if that designation was legally and factually warranted at some point in time, which is highly doubtful, and it was almost certainly wrong. It is undoubtedly wrong now, when the former head of the FBI and the former Secretary of Homeland Security, who have seen documents that none of us have available to us, can certify that there is no current threat from this organization that ought to cover an enormous amount of ground and ought to carry an enormous amount of weight. And the President of the United States and the Secretary of State must consider the current evidence and must delist this organization. In any event, the 1,000 women, the many children, the elderly, and the others who are among the 3,400 residents of Camp Ashraf are entitled to protection, regardless of this anachronistic and false designation still accorded to the MEK. Even the Iraqi government seems to concede this point in theory, claiming to be dealing with the camp residents, quote, in accordance with the human rights principles of international law enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Convent on Civil and Political Rights. But in practice, the current plan to close the camp are a death warrant directed against the residents because the MEK was once designated as a terrorist group by the United States government. Now, this stigma, I predict, is going to be removed. And it's going to be removed as soon as all the evidence is objectively considered. But it will be a Pyrrhic victory if the residents are attacked and killed in the meantime. Despite its claim to be complying with law, the Iraqi government is actively hindering UN agencies from trying to help the residents relocate to safe places. And now they're trying a new ploy. Now they're trying to get some UN agencies and some UN leaders to support the policies that they're trying to implement at Camp Ashraf. That is cynicism at its worst, and it cannot be allowed to succeed. The international community has too often failed in preventing the mass murder of dissidents and perceived enemies of genocidal regimes. Just remember and consider the horrible tragedies of Cambodia, of Rwanda, of Darfur, the former Yugoslavia, Armenia many decades ago, and of Eastern Europe 60 years ago. We said after the Second World War, never again. But you know what's happened to never again? It's become again and again and again and again. This time we must keep our collective humanitarian promise. The world is now on notice. It has no excuse. When the Holocaust happened, everybody said, we didn't know. When the Armenian genocide occurred, we didn't know. When the Cambodian genocides were occurring, people were telling us it was propaganda. We didn't know. Rwanda, Darfur, we didn't know. We know. We have been told. We have been warned. The world, the conscience of the world has been pricked. We know we are on notice. We must act now to protect these 3,400 vulnerable individuals. If we fail to do so, the blood of innocents will be on our collective hands. And there are specific life-saving steps our government can take immediately. You've heard some of them from our distinguished speakers. We should appoint a special envoy to lead the efforts to peacefully resolve this matter. We should call publicly on the Iraqi government to remove the December 31st deadline, and we should do that before Maliki comes to the United States. We should take the matter to the UN Security Council for a binding decision to prevent a human catastrophe